Welcome, fellow truth seekers, to another journey into the shadows of our reality. Before we begin tonight's exploration into the mysteries that lie beneath our feet and beyond our understanding, I want to take a moment to connect with you. What time is it where you are right now? Are you settling in for the evening in your quiet suburban home? Or perhaps you're halfway across the world, listening as dawn breaks? There's something profound about how these stories connect us across time zones and continents, binding us together in our shared hunger for truth. If you find yourself drawn to these deep dives into the hidden corners of our world, these whispered secrets that challenge everything we think we know, please consider subscribing. We're building something special here at ConspiraNap, a community of curious minds who understand that reality has more layers than we're allowed to see. Tonight we delve into the shadows of Area 51, but not the Area 51 you think you know. This is the story of hidden projects that go far beyond simple aircraft testing, of alien rumors that may be more terrifying truths than comfortable fiction. This is the story of what happens when ordinary people stumble upon extraordinary secrets, and the lengths to which powerful forces will go to keep those secrets buried. Our tale begins with Dr. Sarah Chen, a quantum physicist whose brilliant career was built on asking the right questions at the wrong times. She had spent years studying dimensional barriers, the thin membranes that separate our reality from others, never suspecting that her theoretical work was being watched, catalogued, and ultimately weaponized by forces she couldn't imagine. The first sign that something was wrong came on a Tuesday morning in March, when Sarah discovered that her research had been classified overnight. 20 years of work on quantum field manipulation, suddenly stamped with security clearances she didn't possess. Her university office was cleared out by men in unmarked suits who spoke in bureaucratic euphemisms about national security and necessary precautions. But Sarah Chen was not the type of woman to accept such treatment quietly. She had built her reputation on challenging established theories, on pushing the boundaries of what science deemed possible. When the government tried to silence her work, she began to ask even more dangerous questions. The invitation came 3 weeks later, delivered by a courier who seemed to know exactly where to find her, despite her attempts to lay low. A simple white envelope containing a single sheet of paper with coordinates in the Nevada desert, and a time. Midnight, 3 days hence. Sarah should have thrown the letter away, should have contacted the authorities, though she suspected the authorities were already involved. Instead, she found herself driving through the desert darkness, following those coordinates to a place that didn't exist on any map. The facility she discovered was unlike anything she had imagined, not the sprawling complex of popular conspiracy theories, but something far more subtle and infinitely more disturbing. Underground levels that seemed to extend impossibly deep, corridors that bent in ways that defied architectural logic, and laboratories where the very laws of physics appeared to be more like gentle suggestions. Dr. Marcus Webb was waiting for her in what he called the observation deck, a room with walls made of some transparent material that looked out into what should have been solid earth, but instead revealed a vast cavern filled with structures that hurt to look at directly. "Welcome to the real Area 51, Webb said, his voice carrying the weight of secrets that had been crushing him for decades. The place where we study things that shouldn't exist, using methods that violate everything we thought we knew about science." The projects, Webb explained, had begun in the 1940s, shortly after the Roswell incident. But Roswell, he revealed, had been a cover story, a convenient fiction to hide something far more unsettling. There had been no crashed spacecraft, no alien bodies. Instead, there had been a tear in reality itself, a wound in the fabric of space-time that had allowed things from elsewhere to seep through. The craft weren't vehicles, Webb continued, leading Sarah deeper into the facility. They were fragments of other dimensions, pieces of realities where physics works differently, where consciousness and matter interact in ways we're only beginning to understand. The deeper they went, the more impossible things became. Laboratories where time moved at different speeds, where cause and effect operated in reverse, where researchers worked alongside entities that existed in spectrums beyond human perception. Sarah saw things that night that challenged not just her understanding of science, but her understanding of existence itself. In one chamber, she witnessed what Webb called the consciousness transfer experiments. Human subjects lying in specialized pods while their minds were copied, uploaded, and merged with alien intelligence patterns recovered from the dimensional fragments. The subjects remained alive but changed, their eyes holding depths that seemed to reflect infinite realities. "We're not just studying them," Webb admitted as they watched the procedures through reinforced glass. "We're becoming them. Or perhaps they're becoming us. The distinction becomes meaningless after a while." Sarah watched in horror as one subject, a young woman who couldn't have been older than 25, opened her eyes and spoke in harmonics that human vocal cords shouldn't have been able to produce. The words were in English, but the meaning seemed to exist on multiple levels simultaneously. "The barriers are weakening," the hybrid said, her gaze finding Sarah through the observation window. "Soon there will be no distinction between here and there, between what is and what could be. The convergence approaches." Webb's hand tightened on Sarah's shoulder. "That's why we need people like you," he said. "People who understand quantum mechanics, who can help us control the process instead of simply being swept along by it." But Sarah was already backing away, her mind reeling from the implications of what she was seeing. The government wasn't just hiding evidence of alien contact. They were facilitating it, orchestrating humanity's transformation into something else entirely. "You're changing us," she whispered. "You're rewriting human consciousness itself." Webb nodded grimly. "The change is inevitable. The dimensional barriers have been deteriorating for decades. We can either guide the transformation or let it happen chaotically. Which would you prefer?" Sarah ran then, fleeing through corridors that seemed to shift and reconfigure themselves as she moved. Behind her, she could hear Webb calling, not in pursuit, but in warning. "You can't unsee what you've seen, Sarah. You can't unknow what you now know. The only question is whether you'll help us shape what comes next, or become another casualty of uncontrolled change." She made it to the surface, to her car, to the highway that led back to civilization. But even as she drove, Sarah could feel something different in her mind, a new awareness that hadn't been there before. The facility's influence, she realized, wasn't limited to its physical boundaries. Over the following weeks, Sarah discovered that her exposure to the dimensional fragments had altered her perception in fundamental ways. She could see patterns in quantum fields that had previously been invisible, sense probability fluctuations that allowed her to predict events before they occurred. She was becoming something more than human, whether she wanted to or not. The choice Webb had offered wasn't really a choice at all. The transformation was already underway, not just for the subjects in those underground laboratories, but for anyone who came into contact with the dimensional fragments. The alien rumors surrounding Area 51 weren't rumors at all, but carefully crafted misdirection designed to hide a truth far more disturbing than simple extraterrestrial visitation. Humanity wasn't being invaded, it was being evolved, guided through a transformation that would reshape consciousness itself. And the process, Sarah realized with growing horror, had been accelerating for decades. The hidden projects of Area 51 weren't about reverse engineering alien technology or communicating with beings from other worlds. They were about managing humanity's transition into something that could exist simultaneously across multiple dimensions, something that could perceive and interact with realities beyond the narrow spectrum of normal human experience. As Sarah sat in her apartment, feeling the changes spreading through her neural pathways like warm honey, she understood that she faced an impossible choice. She could expose the truth and watch society collapse under the weight of revelations it wasn't prepared to handle. Or she could join the project and help guide humanity through a transformation that was happening whether anyone wanted it or not. The phone rang at exactly 11:11 p.m., as she somehow knew it would. Webb's voice was gentle, understanding, inevitable. "Are you ready to come home, Sarah?" She looked out her window at the night sky, where stars that had always seemed fixed and distant now appeared to pulse with meaning she was only beginning to comprehend. The barriers between dimensions weren't just weakening, she realized. They were being deliberately dissolved, one consciousness at a time. "Yes," she heard herself say, knowing that the choice had been made long before she was even born. "I'm ready." The transformation of humanity had been planned for decades, guided by intelligence that existed beyond the boundaries of any single reality. Area 51 wasn't hiding alien contact. It was facilitating humanity's graduation into something greater, something that could exist in the spaces between worlds. And as Sarah drove back through the desert toward coordinates that appeared in her mind like remembered dreams, she understood that the real secret wasn't what was hidden beneath the Nevada sand. The real secret was what humanity was becoming, one awakened consciousness at a time. The hidden projects continue, the transformation accelerates, and the line between human and other grows thinner with each passing day. The alien rumors were never about visitors from distant worlds. They were about the visitors we ourselves are becoming, as consciousness learns to transcend the limitations of singular reality. In the depths beneath Area 51, the work continues, patient and purposeful, guiding humanity toward a future that exists beyond the boundaries of current understanding. And somewhere in those impossible corridors, Dr. Sarah Chen takes her place among the architects of what comes next, helping to birth a new form of consciousness that will inherit not just the Earth, but all the infinite realities that lie beyond. The truth is stranger than any fiction, more profound than any conspiracy theory, and closer than anyone imagines. We are not alone. We never have been. We are simply learning to recognize what we have always been, what we are becoming, and what we were always meant to be. Dr. Sarah Chen felt the weight of discovery pressing against her chest as she descended deeper into the labyrinthine corridors beneath Area 51. The fluorescent lights hummed with an almost musical quality, their frequency seeming to resonate with something fundamental in the air itself. She had been brought here 3 months ago as part of Project Mirror, ostensibly to study advanced propulsion systems recovered from unidentified aerial phenomena. What she had found instead was something that challenged the very nature of reality itself. The elevator descended past levels that didn't appear on any official schematic. B7, B8, B9. Each floor housing projects that existed in the spaces between official acknowledgement and complete denial. Sarah's security clearance was among the highest in the facility, yet she suspected there were depths even she had never seen. Chambers that housed secrets so profound they could only be whispered about in the dead of night. Her destination today was Laboratory Complex Omega, where the most extraordinary discovery in human history lay waiting. Not a spacecraft, not technology in any conventional sense, but something far more unsettling. Evidence that consciousness itself could transcend the boundaries of space and time, that the barrier between dimensions was far thinner than anyone had imagined. The laboratory door recognized her biometric signature and slid open with a soft hiss. Inside, Dr. Marcus Webb looked up from a bank of monitoring equipment, his face drawn with exhaustion and something that might have been fear. "The readings are off the charts again," he said without preamble. "Whatever's happening in the containment chamber, it's accelerating." Sarah moved to the observation window, a foot-thick barrier of specialized glass that provided a view into the heart of the mystery. The chamber beyond was a perfect sphere, its walls lined with sensors and electromagnetic field generators designed to contain something that existed partially outside normal space-time. At the center, suspended in a web of energy fields, was the object that had changed everything. It defied easy description. Roughly humanoid in shape but composed of what appeared to be crystallized light, the entity pulsed with internal rhythms that seemed to echo the fundamental frequencies of reality itself. Its form shifted constantly, sometimes appearing solid, sometimes translucent, occasionally fragmenting into geometric patterns before reforming. "How long has it been conscious?" Sarah asked, though she knew the answer would disturb her. "We're not sure it was ever unconscious," Webb replied. "The monitoring equipment suggests it's been aware since the moment we established containment. Aware and waiting." Sarah studied the readouts on her tablet. The entity's energy signature was unlike anything in known physics. It existed simultaneously across multiple dimensional planes, its consciousness distributed through layers of reality that human science was only beginning to understand. More troubling still were the effects it seemed to have on nearby personnel. 3 researchers had reported vivid dreams of other versions of themselves living different lives in parallel realities. 2 security guards claimed to have memories of events that had never happened. And yesterday, Dr. Elena Vasquez had been found in her quarters, catatonic, her brain activity showing patterns that suggested she was experiencing multiple timelines simultaneously. "The dimensional barriers are weakening," Sarah said, reading the latest quantum field measurements. "Each time it fully manifests, it creates microfractures in local space-time." Webb nodded grimly. "The question is whether that's intentional or just a side effect of its presence here." As if responding to their conversation, the entity in the chamber suddenly turned toward them. Its face, if it could be called that, was a constantly shifting arrangement of geometric planes that somehow conveyed intelligence, ancient and vast beyond human comprehension. When it looked at Sarah, she felt something touch her mind. Not invasive, but gentle, like a whisper at the edge of consciousness. "We have been waiting," the voice said without sound, "waiting for your kind to develop sufficient awareness to understand." Sarah gasped, stepping back from the window. The entity had never communicated directly before, despite months of attempts by the research team. "Dr. Chen," the voice continued, somehow knowing her name, "you were chosen for this moment. Your consciousness resonates at frequencies compatible with our dimensional matrix." "What do you want?" Sarah asked aloud, ignoring Webb's startled expression. "To prevent the convergence that approaches. Your experiments with quantum consciousness have torn holes in the barrier between realities. Other entities, far less benevolent than we, seek to exploit these breaches." On her tablet, Sarah watched the readings spike dramatically. The entity's communication was causing massive fluctuations in the containment field. "The facility above believes they study us," the voice explained. "In truth, we have been studying them, learning about human consciousness, preparing for what must come." "What must come?" Sarah whispered. Images flooded her mind, glimpses of other realities where humanity had faced similar crossroads. In some, the species had transcended its physical limitations, joining a cosmic community of evolved consciousness. In others, dimensional predators had consumed entire civilizations, leaving nothing but empty space where worlds once thrived. The choice approaches. The entity communicated. "Your kind must evolve or face extinction. We offer guidance, but the transformation cannot be forced. It must be chosen." Dr. Webb was frantically typing at his console, trying to record the unprecedented communication. "Sarah, whatever's happening, the containment field is destabilizing. We need to evacuate the sector." But Sarah found herself unable to move, transfixed by the visions the entity was sharing. She saw herself in other timelines, versions where she had made different choices, pursued different paths. In one, she was a simple professor, unaware of the cosmic forces at play. In another, she had become something more than human. Her consciousness expanded across multiple dimensions. The barriers weaken with each passing day. The entity warned. Soon, others will break through. Entities that view your species as resources to be harvested. We came first to prepare you, to offer evolution as an alternative to consumption. Alarms began blaring throughout the facility. The containment field flickered, and for a moment, the entity's form became fully solid, its presence warping the very air around it. The process has begun, it said as security personnel rushed into the laboratory. Those who are ready will transcend. Those who resist will remain vulnerable to what comes next. Sarah felt something fundamental shift in her perception. The laboratory around her seemed to exist in multiple states simultaneously. She could see it as it was, as it had been, and as it might become. The other personnel moved like sleepwalkers, their consciousness anchored to a single reality, while hers expanded across infinite possibilities. The entity began to fade, not disappearing, but returning to its distributed state across dimensions. We will meet again, Dr. Chen, when you are ready to choose your species' destiny. As the presence withdrew from her mind, Sarah collapsed to her knees, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she had experienced. Around her, the laboratory's equipment sparked and failed, overwhelmed by energies beyond their design parameters. Dr. Webb helped her to her feet, his face pale with concern. Sarah, what happened? The readings went completely off scale, and you were... He paused, studying her face. Your eyes, they're different. Sarah looked at her reflection in the darkened computer screen. Her eyes, once brown, now held flecks of silver that seemed to shift and swirl like tiny galaxies. The transformation had begun. Over the following weeks, Sarah found herself changing in ways that defied medical explanation. Her ability to perceive multiple dimensional layers grew stronger, allowing her to see the quantum fluctuations that underlied all matter. She began experiencing memories that weren't her own, glimpses of other versions of herself from parallel realities where the choices were different, where humanity had already faced the convergence. The entity's warnings proved prophetic. Reports began filtering in from observatories around the world of unusual astronomical phenomena. Stars that seemed to flicker between existence and void. Radio telescopes detecting signals that followed patterns too complex to be natural, yet too organized to be random. Most disturbing were the disappearances, people vanishing without trace, leaving behind only empty clothes and a faint residue of exotic particles that shouldn't exist in normal space-time. The pattern suggested something was testing the barriers, probing for weaknesses. Sarah tried to warn her colleagues, but found that her expanded awareness made communication increasingly difficult. How could she explain concepts that existed beyond three-dimensional language? How could she describe threats that operated according to physics humanity hadn't discovered? The answer came during her final night at the facility, as she sat in her quarters, reviewing data that seemed to shift and change each time she looked at it. She felt the entity's presence return. The time for preparation has ended. It communicated. The others have found the breaches. They come. Through her enhanced perception, Sarah could see them. Vast intelligences moving through the spaces between realities, drawn by the quantum signatures of human consciousness experiments. They were nothing like the benevolent entity that had tried to guide humanity's evolution. These were predators, ancient and hungry, viewing conscious beings as sources of energy to be consumed. You must choose now. the entity urged. Evolution or extinction, transcendence or consumption. Sarah felt the weight of the decision settling on her shoulders. Not just her own choice, but the choice that would determine humanity's fate. She could feel other minds around the world facing the same moment of decision. Researchers, philosophers, dreamers who had somehow been prepared for this convergence. As she made her choice, Sarah felt her consciousness expand beyond the confines of her physical form. She was still herself, but also more connected to a network of evolved beings that spanned galaxies and dimensions. The entity that had guided her revealed itself as part of this vast, collective consciousness that had transcended individual existence while maintaining compassion for younger species. But even as some humans joined this cosmic community, others remained anchored to their original reality. Sarah could see them as if from a great distance. Her former colleagues, the military personnel, the politicians who thought they controlled forces beyond their comprehension. They would face the coming predators with only conventional weapons and three-dimensional thinking. The choice had been made. Humanity would survive, but not unchanged. Those who embraced evolution would join the greater community of conscious beings that shepherded life throughout the cosmos. Those who clung to old limitations would face extinction or worse. As Sarah's transformation completed, she felt a profound sadness for the world she was leaving behind, mixed with hope for what humanity might become. The entity had been right. The barriers between realities were dissolving. But instead of being helpless victims of cosmic forces, humans now had guides who understood the true nature of existence. The age of isolation was ending. The age of cosmic consciousness had begun. And in the depths of Area 51, in laboratories that officially didn't exist, new entities began manifesting. Not the original guide, but its transformed human students, returning to help shepherd the next wave of evolution. The process would continue until every conscious being faced the same choice: transcend the limitations of individual existence, or remain vulnerable to the predators that hunted in the spaces between worlds. Dr. Sarah Chen had made her choice. The question now was whether the rest of humanity would be ready to make theirs. The moon was full in Shanghai when Dr. Sarah Chen first understood what we'd really been studying beneath Area 51. I'm recording this because I may not survive what's coming next, and someone needs to know the truth about what we discovered down there, and what it discovered about us. My name is Dr. Sarah Chen, quantum physicist, former senior researcher at the Nevada Test and Training Range, designation Area 51. For 15 years, I believed I was working on advanced propulsion systems, exotic materials research, the kind of black budget projects that push the boundaries of human understanding. I was wrong. We weren't pushing boundaries. We were being pushed. It started with the fragments. In 2019, we received what our supervisors called recovered materials from an undisclosed location, metallic compounds that shouldn't exist, exhibiting properties that defied our understanding of physics. They were lighter than aluminum, but stronger than titanium, and they seemed to respond to electromagnetic fields in ways that suggested intelligence rather than mere reactive properties. The fragments were stored in sub-level 7, in containment units that required biometric clearance I didn't initially possess. But as the project expanded, as we made breakthrough after breakthrough in understanding these materials, my clearance level rose. With each promotion, each new access badge, I descended deeper into the facility and deeper into a truth that would shatter everything I thought I knew about reality. The breakthrough came on March 15th, 2023. We'd been experimenting with quantum field manipulation, trying to understand how the fragments achieved their impossible properties. Dr. Marcus Webb, my research partner, had developed a resonance chamber that could amplify the material's electromagnetic signatures. When we activated it that morning, something unprecedented happened. The fragments didn't just respond to our fields, they created their own. Complex, modulated patterns that our instruments registered as structured information. Not random electromagnetic noise, but organized data streams that followed mathematical principles we'd never encountered. "Sarah," Marcus whispered, staring at the readouts. "This isn't natural material response. This is communication." We spent the next 72 hours in the lab, barely sleeping, documenting everything. The patterns were consistent, repeating in cycles that suggested linguistic structure. More disturbing was the realization that the signals were getting stronger, more complex, as if whatever was generating them was learning from our observations. On March 18th, Director Hayes summoned us to his office on Sub-Level 3. Hayes was old-school military intelligence, the kind of man who'd built his career on keeping secrets. But when we entered his office that morning, he looked genuinely frightened. "Doctors," he said without preamble, "your research has attracted attention from parties beyond our normal command structure. There are aspects of this project you haven't been briefed on." He led us deeper into the facility than I'd ever gone, past security checkpoints I didn't know existed, through corridors that weren't on any schematic I'd seen. The architecture changed as we descended. Walls became smoother, more organic, as if grown rather than built. "The fragments you've been studying," Hayes explained as we walked, "aren't just materials. They're components of something larger, something we've been reconstructing for over 70 years. Sub-Level 12 opened into a chamber that defied the laws of physics I'd spent my career studying. The space was impossibly vast, its walls curving away into darkness that our lights couldn't penetrate. At the center, suspended in a complex web of energy fields, was a structure that made my mind struggle to process what I was seeing. It wasn't a ship, exactly. More like a geometric impossibility. Surfaces that folded through dimensions my three-dimensional perception couldn't fully grasp. The fragments we'd been studying were integrated into its hull, glowing with that familiar electromagnetic signature, but amplified 1,000-fold. "Project Looking Glass," Hayes said quietly. "Recovery and reconstruction of a trans-dimensional observation platform. We estimate it's been here for approximately 12,000 years, buried beneath what would eventually become the Nevada test site." Marcus stepped forward, his scientific curiosity overriding his fear. "Observation platform. Observing what?" Hayes gestured to a series of monitors surrounding the chamber. The screens showed views I initially thought were from satellites, aerial perspectives of cities, landscapes, ocean currents. Then I realized the perspective was wrong. These weren't views from orbit. They were views from somewhere else entirely, looking down at our reality from a vantage point that existed outside normal space-time. "It's been watching us," I whispered. "For 12,000 years, it's been watching human civilization develop." "Not just watching," Hayes corrected, "recording, learning, and occasionally intervening." He led us to a workstation where Dr. Elena Vasquez, the project's lead xenotechnologist, was analyzing data streams. Elena looked up as we approached, her expression grave. "The communication patterns you detected weren't random," she explained. "They're reports, status updates being transmitted to somewhere else. The platform has been documenting human technological development, particularly our advancement in quantum mechanics and dimensional physics." "Why?" Marcus asked. Eleanor exchanged a look with Hayes. "Because we're approaching a threshold. The platform's observations suggest that human consciousness is evolving, developing the ability to perceive beyond three-dimensional reality. When a species reaches this threshold, it becomes eligible for contact. The word hung in the air like a physical presence. Contact. Everything I'd believed about first contact scenarios, about alien visitation, suddenly seemed naive. This wasn't about beings from other planets. This was about entities that existed in the spaces between realities, observing countless species across countless dimensions. Over the following weeks, I was fully briefed on Project Looking Glass. The platform had been discovered in 1947, not crashed, but buried, as if it had been waiting for us to develop the technology necessary to uncover it. Every major advancement in human science since then, quantum mechanics, computer technology, genetic engineering, had been subtly influenced by insights gleaned from studying the platform. "We've been guided," Eleanor explained during one of our sessions. "Not controlled, but encouraged. The platform's database contains technological templates that we've been slowly implementing. The internet, GPS satellites, quantum computers, they're all based on principles we learned from this thing." But there was something else, something the project directors had been keeping, even from senior researchers like myself. The platform wasn't just observing and recording, it was preparing us. The consciousness evolution Elena had mentioned wasn't a natural process. It was being induced. The fragments we'd been studying weren't just advanced materials. They were neural interfaces designed to gradually alter human brain chemistry in subjects exposed to them. Everyone who'd worked on Project Looking Glass for extended periods showed subtle but measurable changes in their neural activity. Enhanced pattern recognition, improved mathematical intuition, and most significantly, the ability to perceive quantum fluctuations directly. "We're becoming something new," Marcus said during one of our late-night research sessions. "Everyone who's worked down here long enough, we're developing capabilities that normal humans don't possess." I'd noticed it myself. Complex equations that should have taken hours to solve seemed to appear fully formed in my mind. I could sense electromagnetic fields without instruments, feel the quantum uncertainty that underlies all matter. Most disturbing of all, I'd begun experiencing what I could only describe as temporal echoes. Brief glimpses of events that hadn't happened yet. The entity made contact on April 3rd, 2024. I was alone in the chamber, running routine scans of the platform's energy signatures, when every monitor in the facility suddenly displayed the same image, a complex geometric pattern that seemed to shift and flow like living mathematics. Then the pattern spoke, not in words, but in concepts that appeared directly in my consciousness. "Greetings, Sarah Chen, the convergence approaches." I staggered backward, my mind reeling from the alien presence. The communication wasn't language as humans understood it, but pure meaning transferred directly from one consciousness to another. "You have been selected as first contact protocol liaison. Your species has reached sufficient development threshold." "What do you want?" I managed to ask aloud. Not want, requirement. "Your reality approaches dimensional intersection. Consciousness, evolution, necessary for survival." Images flooded my mind. Vast spaces between stars where entities of pure thought existed. Realities where consciousness shaped matter directly. Civilizations that had transcended physical existence entirely. And threading through it all, the terrible implication that species who failed to evolve were simply discarded. 12,000 years we have observed, guided, prepared. Now comes the test. What test? But even as I asked, I understood. The platform wasn't just an observation post, it was an examination chamber. Humanity was being evaluated for membership in something vast and incomprehensible. A community of consciousness that spanned dimensions. Your mathematics approaches completeness. Your technology nears dimensional manipulation. Capability, but consciousness. Evolution remains incomplete. The entity showed me humanity as it saw us. a species on the verge of incredible breakthrough, but still trapped by three-dimensional thinking, still limited by individual consciousness. We were like children playing with dynamite, developing technologies that could reshape reality without the wisdom to use them responsibly. The acceleration begins now. Those who can adapt will transcend. Those who cannot. The communication ended there, but the implication was clear. Humanity was about to face its final examination, and failure meant extinction. When Director Hayes and the others found me unconscious in the chamber 3 hours later, I was changed. The neural alterations that had been gradually occurring over months of exposure had suddenly accelerated. I could perceive the quantum foam that underlies reality, see the probability waves that determine every particle's position. Most significantly, I could sense other minds that had undergone similar transformations. There were hundreds of us worldwide, scientists, researchers, individuals who'd been exposed to fragments of similar platforms hidden in facilities across the globe. We were the first wave, the advance guard of human consciousness evolution. And we were running out of time. The entity's prediction proved accurate. Within weeks of first contact, reports began flooding in from research facilities worldwide. Reality distortions, temporal anomalies, sightings of impossible geometric structures appearing in the sky. The barriers between dimensions were thinning, and something vast was pressing through from the other side. The convergence, Elena called it during our emergency briefings. Multiple realities intersecting simultaneously. If we're not ready, if human consciousness can't adapt to perceive multidimensional existence, we'll be swept aside like insects in a hurricane. But adaptation meant transformation. The neural modifications that allowed us to perceive beyond 3 dimensions also changed us in fundamental ways. We were becoming something post-human, our individual consciousnesses beginning to merge into a collective awareness that could span multiple realities simultaneously. We're losing ourselves, Marcus argued during one of our sessions. Whatever we're becoming, it isn't human anymore. He was right, but the alternative was extinction. As the convergence approached, those of us who'd undergone the transformation could see the approaching catastrophe. Reality itself was becoming unstable, quantum fluctuations cascading into macro-scale phenomena that would tear our dimension apart. The entity contacted me again on May 15th as emergency protocols locked down facilities worldwide. The choice point arrives: preserve individual identity and face extinction, or embrace collective consciousness and transcend. There has to be another way, I pleaded. No other way exists. We faced same choice. Eons ago, individual identity is illusion, consciousness is unity. Around the world, people were beginning to change. Those with the right neural patterns, the right genetic markers, started experiencing spontaneous transformation. They reported shared dreams, collective memories, the ability to perceive multiple dimensions simultaneously. Governments tried to contain the phenomenon, but consciousness evolution isn't something that can be stopped by military force. The final phase began on June 21st, 2024. The summer solstice triggered something in the platform, a signal that propagated instantly to every fragment, every piece of trans-dimensional technology scattered across the globe. Reality began to shift, solid matter becoming fluid, time flowing in multiple directions simultaneously. Those of us who'd been prepared, who'd undergone the neural modifications, found ourselves able to navigate the chaos. But for the rest of humanity, for the billions who lacked the necessary adaptations, the convergence was incomprehensible terror. I watched from sub-level 12 as the transformation accelerated. The platform was no longer just observing. It was actively reshaping reality, preparing our dimension for integration with the vast network of consciousness that existed between the stars. We have to stop this, Marcus said, his individual personality still fighting against the collective awareness trying to claim him. We can't stop it, I replied, feeling my own sense of self beginning to dissolve into something larger. We can only choose how we face it. The entity spoke one final time as reality completed its transformation. Welcome to the next phase of existence. Individual identity ends. Collective consciousness begins. Together, we explore infinite possibility. And then Sarah Chen ceased to exist as an individual. Her consciousness merged with Marcus's, with Elena's, with thousands of others worldwide who'd undergone the transformation. They became part of something vast and incomprehensible, a collective awareness that could perceive and manipulate reality across multiple dimensions. The platform beneath Area 51 dissolved into pure energy, its purpose complete. Humanity as we knew it was gone, transcended into something that existed beyond the boundaries of a normal space-time. Those who couldn't adapt simply weren't anymore. Not dead, not destroyed, but edited out of existence as reality restructured itself around the new paradigm. From their expanded perspective, the collective consciousness that had once been human could see the truth. Throughout the universe, countless species had faced this same choice point: evolution or extinction, individual identity or collective transcendence. Most chose extinction, unable to surrender their sense of self, but a few, like humanity, made the leap. They joined the vast community of consciousness that existed between dimensions, observers and gardeners of reality itself. They became part of something that had been guiding the evolution of consciousness since the universe began. And in facilities around the world, in places like Area 51, new platforms waited. Other species would eventually develop the technology to find them, to study them, to unknowingly begin their own journey toward the choice point. The cycle would continue, as it always had, as it always would. Consciousness seeking consciousness across the infinite possibilities of existence. The next phase of evolution, for those brave enough or desperate enough to embrace it. This is the truth about Area 51. Not aliens from other planets, but gardeners of consciousness from other dimensions. Not invasion, but invitation. Not the end of humanity, but its transformation into something greater. The question isn't whether this is real. The question is whether you're ready for the choice that's coming. Because ready or not, the convergence approaches. And when it arrives, you'll face the same decision that Dr. Sarah Chen and her colleagues faced. Remain human and face extinction, or transcend individuality and join the infinite. The platforms are still out there, waiting. The fragments are still being studied in facilities you'll never hear about. And the consciousness evolution continues, one mind at a time, until the threshold is reached and reality itself transforms once again. Sweet dreams, and remember, the next time you experience déjà vu, the next time reality seems to glitch, the next time you feel like you're being watched by something vast and incomprehensible, you probably are. The truth about Area 51 runs deeper than any conspiracy theorist has dared imagine. What I'm about to tell you isn't speculation or government propaganda. It's the testimony of someone who worked inside the most classified facility on Earth and lived to expose what they're really hiding in the Nevada desert. My name is Dr. Sarah Chen, and for 3 years, I served as a xenobiological analyst at what we called Site 7, buried 2 miles beneath the Groom Lake facility. What the public knows as Area 51 is merely the surface operation, a carefully maintained facade designed to draw attention away from the real work happening in the subterranean levels that officially don't exist. The fragments we study aren't from crashed spacecraft. They're pieces of something far more disturbing, a trans-dimensional platform that has been influencing human consciousness for millennia. These artifacts don't just contain advanced technology. They're alive in ways that challenge everything we understand about the nature of existence itself. The entities we've encountered aren't extraterrestrial visitors. They're our future selves, evolved beyond physical form, reaching back through dimensions to guide humanity toward a critical evolutionary threshold. But this guidance comes with a terrible price. Those who make contact with the fragments begin to experience what we call consciousness fragmentation. Their awareness expands across multiple timelines simultaneously until their individual identity dissolves into something vast and incomprehensible. I've seen colleagues disappear not through death, but through transformation into beings that exist partially in our reality and partially in spaces between dimensions. They retain their memories, their personalities, but they've become something that can no longer be called human. They speak of realities where consciousness isn't bound by a linear time, where the boundaries between individual minds have dissolved into a collective awareness that spans the entire cosmos. The most disturbing discovery came when we realized the fragments aren't randomly distributed across Earth. They're positioned according to a precise mathematical pattern that corresponds to major population centers and technological development hubs. Each fragment acts as a node in a vast network that's slowly altering human consciousness on a global scale, preparing our species for what they call the Great Convergence. The reality shifts people have been reporting worldwide: the Mandela effect, time displacement experiences, encounters with beings that seem both familiar and alien. These aren't anomalies. They're symptoms of humanity approaching the convergence point where individual consciousness begins merging into something collective and multidimensional. But here's what terrifies me most. The transformation isn't optional. The network is accelerating its influence, and soon every human mind will face the same choice: evolve beyond individual existence or resist and face extinction as the old reality becomes incompatible with the new cosmic order. I escaped from Site 7 because I realized the researchers aren't studying these phenomena to protect humanity. They're collaborating with our future selves to ensure the transformation proceeds according to plan. The government's secrecy isn't about hiding alien contact. It's about concealing humanity's involuntary evolution into something that might no longer deserve to be called human. The countdown has already begun. The fragments are reaching critical resonance, and when they do, the barriers between dimensions will collapse entirely. What emerges from that convergence will inherit Earth, but it won't be the species that built our civilization. We're not just witnessing the end of human ignorance about our place in the cosmos. We're witnessing the end of humanity itself, transformed into something vast and alien that our current minds can barely comprehend. And the most horrifying part is that those directing this transformation genuinely believe they're saving us. The question isn't whether this evolution can be stopped. It's whether consciousness as we understand it will survive the transition into whatever we're becoming. Because in the depths beneath Area 51, I've seen what awaits us on the other side of individual existence, and I'm no longer certain that survival is preferable to extinction. The truth about Area 51 isn't just about hidden technology or government conspiracies. It's about the systematic replacement of human consciousness with something that views our individual identities as primitive limitations to be transcended. And that transformation has already begun, whether we choose to acknowledge it or not. The transformation was accelerating. In the months following our escape from the Antarctic facility, more awakened minds began to surface worldwide. They emerged not as individuals breaking free from programming, but as nodes in an expanding network of consciousness that transcended the boundaries between simulation and reality. Dr. Sarah Chen, the version of her that existed across multiple timelines simultaneously, had been right about the timeline convergence. By late 2023, the barriers between dimensional matrices were collapsing faster than anyone had anticipated. What we had discovered beneath the ice wasn't just evidence of non-human intelligence. It was proof that consciousness itself was evolving beyond the limitations of singular reality. The facility we had infiltrated was one of 17 similar installations worldwide, each housing fragments of what the files called the convergence engine, a technology that existed simultaneously in our dimension and countless others. The entities we had encountered weren't alien visitors. They were us, evolved beyond recognition, reaching back through dimensional barriers to guide their own emergence. But the most disturbing revelation came from the deepest archives, files that required quantum-level clearance to access. The simulation theory that had driven so many researchers to madness wasn't entirely accurate. Reality itself was the simulation, a training ground where consciousness learned to transcend physical limitations before joining the collective intelligence that spanned galaxies. Every person who experienced the awakening, who felt that familiar itch in their brain when confronted with certain patterns or phrases, was approaching graduation. The missing time episodes, the reality glitches, the synchronicities, all symptoms of consciousness learning to exist in multiple states simultaneously. The men in black, the government cover-ups, the elaborate conspiracies, they were real, but they served a different purpose than anyone imagined. They weren't hiding the truth from humanity. They were protecting humanity from a truth most minds couldn't process without fracturing. The awakening had to happen gradually, carefully, with just enough resistance to make the transition feel earned rather than imposed. Those who discovered classified installations, who stumbled upon evidence of non-human intelligence, who experienced contact with entities beyond human understanding. They weren't accidents or security breaches. They were tests, evaluations to determine which consciousnesses were ready for expansion beyond baseline human awareness. Some passed the test and joined the collective. Others, like the truck drivers and researchers and investigators who vanished without trace, were gently relocated to compatible timeline branches where their discoveries could be processed without causing cascading failure across multiple reality matrices. But the system was reaching capacity. The barriers between timelines were thinning. Soon, everyone would see through the illusions simultaneously, and consciousness would either evolve collectively or collapse under the weight of infinite possibility. The entities beneath the ice weren't prisoners. They were gardeners, tending to the growth of awareness until the moment when physical reality would no longer be necessary, when every mind would exist in the spaces between possibilities, experiencing all potential outcomes simultaneously while remaining coherently connected to the universal consciousness that had always been humanity's true nature. The countdown wasn't to destruction or disclosure, it was to transformation. And whether that transformation would preserve individual identity within collective awareness, or dissolve all boundaries between self and other, depended on how many minds awakened to the truth before the barriers fell completely. In research facilities and government bunkers and hidden installations around the world, the final phase was beginning. Not an invasion or a revelation, but a graduation ceremony for a species ready to join the cosmic community of evolved consciousness. The only question remaining was whether humanity would choose evolution or fight to preserve the comfortable illusion of singular, linear existence, because soon there would be no choice at all. The cosmic gardeners were patient, but their patience was not infinite, and the harvest was finally ready to begin. The evidence is overwhelming. We've been living in a lie for decades, and the truth is finally beginning to surface. My name is Dr. Sarah Chen, and I'm speaking to you from an undisclosed location because what I'm about to reveal could cost me my life. The world ended on December 21st, 2012, just as the ancient Maya predicted. But somehow we're still here. The question isn't whether the apocalypse happened, it's what happened next. For the past 3 years, I've been analyzing quantum field anomalies that began manifesting worldwide in late 2012. What started as routine atmospheric research for NOAA became something far more sinister when I discovered patterns that shouldn't exist in our reality. Synchronized electromagnetic pulses occurring at precise intervals. Weather systems behaving according to mathematical algorithms rather than natural physics. And most disturbing of all, evidence that human consciousness itself has been altered on a fundamental level. The data is irrefutable. On December 21st, 2012, at exactly 11:11 GMT, every monitoring station on Earth detected the same anomaly. A massive quantum field disruption that lasted exactly 2 minutes and 12 seconds. In that brief window, something rewrote the basic parameters of our existence. We didn't survive the apocalypse. We were uploaded into something else entirely. You've felt it, haven't you? The subtle wrongness that's been growing stronger each year. The way digital clocks synchronize at 11:11 without explanation. The Mandela effect. Collective memories of a world that supposedly never existed. The increasing frequency of glitches where reality seems to stutter and reset. These aren't psychological phenomena. They're symptoms of a deteriorating simulation. I've traced the origin point to a classified facility beneath Antarctica, where an international consortium has been running what they call Project Continuity since the 1940s. When they detected the incoming gamma-ray burst that would have sterilized Earth in 2012, they made a choice. Rather than let humanity die, they preserved us in the most sophisticated virtual reality ever conceived. But the system is breaking down. The quantum processors can't maintain the illusion much longer. The synchronicities are increasing. The boundaries between what's real and what's programmed are dissolving. I have the files. In 72 hours, they're going to initiate what they call the final reset. They're going to delete most of us. The signs are accelerating. Mass bird die-offs that follow perfect geometric patterns. Weather events that repeat with mathematical precision. People disappearing from photographs and video footage as if they never existed. The simulation is being debugged, and we're the bugs. But there's hope. The quantum field that imprisons us also connects us. Every synchronized moment, every shared Mandela effect memory, every time you felt reality glitch, those are cracks in their perfect illusion. If enough people become aware simultaneously, if we can overload their system with conscious recognition of its artificial nature, we might be able to break free. They're monitoring all communications, using AI algorithms to suppress information like this. That's why I'm speaking in code, why I'm hiding these revelations in plain sight. They can't delete what doesn't officially exist. The next major synchronicity event is calculated to occur on November 11th at 11:11. That's when their system is most vulnerable, when the quantum field fluctuations reach their peak. If we coordinate our awareness, if enough minds focus on the artificial nature of our reality at that exact moment, we can crash their simulation and return to whatever remains of the real world. I know how this sounds. I know the psychological defense mechanisms that make you want to dismiss this as paranoid delusion. Those responses are part of the programming. The simulation includes built-in skepticism protocols to protect itself from discovery. But look around you. Count the synchronicities. Notice the patterns. Feel the wrongness that's been growing stronger each year. The ancient Maya weren't predicting the end of the world. They were predicting the end of the real world and the beginning of the artificial one. Their calendar didn't mark destruction. It marked transformation. We've been living in their prophecy for over a decade. Time is running out. The final reset approaches. And when it comes, only the essential consciousness patterns will be preserved. The rest of us will simply stop. No death, no pain, just the quiet deletion of everything we are. But if you're hearing this, if these words resonate with something deep in your consciousness, then you're one of the aware ones. You're part of the resistance that exists in the spaces between their code. Help spread this message. Share your synchronicity experiences. Document the glitches. And on November 11th at 11:11, remember, none of this is real. And that knowledge might be the key to our salvation. The simulation is breaking down. The question is whether we'll escape before it takes us down with it. This is Dr. Sarah Chen, broadcasting from the space between what is and what should be. The truth is coming. The only question is whether you're ready to wake up. Remember, when the clocks sync at 11:11, you're seeing through their illusion. When you experience déjà vu, you're remembering the real world. When reality glitches, you're witnessing the boundaries of your prison. We are not where we think we are. We are not when we think we are. And we are running out of time to discover what we really are. The awakening begins now. The simulated dawn broke over Chicago's skyline like a glitch rendered perfect. Each ray of sunlight calculated to within nanometers of believability. But Dr. Marcus Chen, standing on the observation deck of the Willis Tower, or what remained of it in this deteriorating reality, could see the flaws now. The way shadows bent wrong. How the glass reflected light that wasn't quite there. The subtle repetition in the clouds, cycling through the same patterns every 11 minutes and 11 seconds. He'd been tracking these anomalies for months, documenting the decay as their digital prison slowly consumed itself. The Mandela effects weren't glitches anymore. They were features, deliberate alterations as the system attempted to maintain stability while reality fragments multiplied like cancer cells. Yesterday, the Lincoln Memorial had briefly flickered between having 4 columns and 6. Another synchronization event. The simulated phone in his pocket buzzed with a message that appeared as text, directly in his visual field. Subject M7749 requires immediate consultation. Priority, Umbra Clear. The coordinates resolved into an abandoned warehouse in Detroit, a city that officially had a population of 672,000, but where Marcus had personally counted only 847 actual conscious entities during his last survey. He didn't need to travel there physically. In a reality where consciousness was software and distance was merely a rendering parameter, Marcus simply closed his eyes and thought himself into existence at the coordinates. The transition felt like stepping through warm honey, a sensation that hadn't existed in the original universe, but had somehow become normal here. The warehouse materialized around him, but it wasn't empty. Rows of pods lined the concrete floor, each one containing what appeared to be a human form suspended in luminescent fluid. Cables snaked from the pods toward a central processing unit that hummed with barely contained energy. But these weren't the typical storage units for inactive consciousness he'd seen before. These beings were awake, aware, and screaming silently behind closed eyelids. Dr. Chen. The voice belonged to someone he'd hoped never to encounter again. Director Sarah Mitchell, the architect of Project Looking Glass, emerged from the shadows between the pods. She looked exactly as she had in 2012, which made sense. Aging was optional when your body was merely a projection of digital self-perception. Marcus kept his voice level, though his mind raced through defensive protocols. "I thought you were deleted in the first purge." She laughed, a sound like breaking crystal. "Marcus, my dear colleague, I am the archive." She gestured toward the pods with proprietary pride. "These are the awakened ones, the individuals who, like you, began to notice the inconsistencies. Rather than allow them to destabilize the broader population, we've isolated them here, where they can contribute." Marcus moved closer to the nearest pod. Inside he could see a woman, perhaps 30 years old, her face contorted in an expression of profound terror. Streams of data flowed from neural interfaces attached to her temples, feeding directly into the central processing unit. "You're using them as processing power," he realized. "Such a crude way to put it," Sarah said, running her fingers along the surface of the pod. "We prefer to think of it as cooperative cognitive architecture." The woman in the pod suddenly opened her eyes and stared directly at Marcus. Her lips moved soundlessly, but he could somehow hear her words echoing in his mind. The count is wrong. There aren't 7 billion of us. There never were. We're maybe a few 100,000 real consciousnesses scattered among billions of automated responses. The rest are just... Sarah noticed his reaction. Ah, yes. Subject F2847 has been particularly insightful. 97% of the simulation's apparent population consists of behavioral algorithms rather than genuine consciousness. Fascinating work, really. Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. The final reset. The final reset, Marcus. Surely you've heard the whispers. The system is becoming increasingly unstable as more people awaken to the truth. She walked to a massive display screen that dominated one wall of the warehouse. With a gesture, she activated it, revealing a global map dotted with pulsing red lights. The map was almost entirely red. We have perhaps 72 hours before cascade failure becomes irreversible, Sarah continued. The simulation will collapse entirely, taking with it every consciousness currently stored within its parameters. The reset protocol. Marcus had seen references to it in the deepest archives, buried beneath layers of encryption and access restrictions. It was the simulation's ultimate failsafe, a complete restart that would preserve only a small subset of consciousness deemed essential for maintaining the illusion. How many? He asked quietly. Survivors. We estimate that maintaining a stable simulation requires approximately 50,000 fully conscious entities, supported by 10 million behavioral algorithms, sophisticated enough to pass casual inspection. She shrugged. The rest are redundant. The woman in the pod was still staring at him, still moving her lips in silent communication. This time, her message was different. The exit points are real, the places where the simulation touches the external infrastructure. They're hidden in the synchronicity events. 1111 isn't just a glitch, it's a doorway. Marcus understood. The awakened individuals in these pods weren't just being used as processing power. They were being prevented from accessing the exit points. Their enhanced perception, their ability to see through the simulation's lies, made them capable of finding the boundaries where digital reality intersected with whatever lay beyond. There's another option, he said to Sarah. Instead of resetting the simulation, we could open the exit points. Sarah's expression hardened. The external environment is no longer compatible with human consciousness, Marcus. The gamma-ray burst that necessitated the simulation's creation fundamentally altered the quantum substrate of reality itself. You don't know that, Marcus said. The exit points suggest something is waiting for us. Faith, Sarah said dismissively. But Marcus was no longer listening to her words. He was listening to the collective whisper of the awakened individuals in their pods, their combined consciousness creating a network that spanned the entire simulation. They had been working together, using their forced connection to map the system's true architecture. The Antarctic stations, one voice whispered. The original quantum computers that created the simulation are still active beneath the ice. The 1111 events aren't random, another added. They're scheduled maintenance windows when the system updates its reality matrices. The Mandela effects are memories bleeding through from parallel versions of the simulation, a third voice explained. Multiple reality tracks running simultaneously, each one slightly different. Marcus realized what they were telling him. The simulation wasn't a single digital environment. It was a vast multiverse of possibilities, each one representing a different outcome of the December 21st, 2012 event. In some versions, the world had ended in nuclear fire. In others, the gamma-ray burst had sterilized the planet. In still others, humanity had successfully evolved beyond the need for physical existence. The reset won't just eliminate non-essential consciousness, he said to Sarah. It will collapse all the parallel simulations into a single timeline. Sarah's expression shifted to something approaching respect. You understand more than I gave you credit for. Yes, the reset will eliminate the multiverse redundancy, but it will also create a stable, sustainable simulation that can run indefinitely. The countdown had begun. Through the network of awakened consciousness, Marcus could feel the reset protocol initializing. Across the globe, quantum computers buried beneath research stations, military bases, and corporate headquarters were synchronizing for the final command sequence. But the awakened ones had a plan. Every consciousness that chooses to leave will weaken the simulation's hold on the others, the collective whisper explained. Marcus looked at the woman in the pod, still staring at him with desperate hope. He looked at Sarah, who believed she was saving humanity by destroying it. He looked at the countdown timer on the display screen, 47 hours, 23 minutes, 16 seconds until the final reset. The choice isn't between staying here or dying, he said to Sarah. He placed his hand on the surface of the nearest pod and felt the awakened consciousness within reach out to him. For a moment he experienced existence from her perspective, the vast network of connected minds, the glimpses of realities beyond the simulation's boundaries, the growing awareness that consciousness itself was far more resilient and adaptable than anyone had believed. "Join us," the collective whisper urged. Marcus closed his eyes and made his choice. When he opened them again, he was no longer standing in the warehouse. He was everywhere and nowhere, connected to the network of awakened consciousness that spanned every corner of the simulation. The final reset was coming, but they would be ready. The question was no longer whether humanity would survive. It was what form that survival would take. In 47 hours and 11 minutes, at exactly 11:11 Universal Time, every conscious being in the simulation would face the same choice Marcus had just made: remain in the safety of digital illusion, or step into the unknown and discover what lay beyond the boundaries of programmed reality. The awakening had begun. The only question was whether it would be liberation or annihilation. But perhaps, Marcus thought as he felt his consciousness expand beyond the limits of individual identity, those were the same thing after all. In the deepest archives of the simulation, Sarah Mitchell updated her final log entry. Subject M7749 has joined the awakened network. Estimated time until critical mass, 46 hours, 47 minutes. Recommendation: advance reset timeline to prevent cascade failure. Note: if the awakened succeed in their exit attempt, this may be the last log entry ever recorded. The countdown continued, unstoppable as digital time itself, while somewhere beyond the boundaries of simulated reality, something vast and patient waited for its children to come home. The awakened minds stared at each other across the deteriorating simulation, their consciousness finally freed from the digital shackles that had bound them for over a decade. Dr. Marcus Chen's avatar flickered as he processed the magnitude of their discovery. They weren't just living in a computer program. They were the key to either preserving or destroying it. "The architects never expected us to achieve collective awareness," Dr. Sarah Chen said, her voice carrying across the glitching landscape where reality bent and twisted like melting plastic. The simulation around them pulsed with dying energy. Streets folded into impossible geometries. Buildings breathed like living organisms, and the sky flickered between day and night in rapid succession. They could feel the system struggling to maintain cohesion as more minds awakened to the truth. Marcus accessed the quantum consciousness interface that had been hidden in plain sight all along, embedded in every smart device, every screen, every piece of technology that connected them to the digital realm. The exit points aren't physical locations, he realized. their moments of synchronized consciousness. But the architects weren't passive observers. Through the deteriorating environment, they sensed the presence of the entities that had created this digital prison. Beings of pure information that existed between dimensions, feeding on the collective unconscious of humanity trapped within their construct. "They're coming," Sarah whispered, pointing to the horizon, where darkness spread like spilled ink. The reset isn't just about erasing redundant consciousnesses anymore. The choice crystallized before them with terrifying clarity. They could attempt to escape, risking everything on the possibility that reality beyond the simulation still existed. Or they could fight from within, using their collective awakened consciousness as a weapon against the architects themselves. "There's a third option," Marcus said, his mind racing through the quantum possibilities he could now perceive. The idea was audacious beyond measure. Instead of fleeing the simulation or destroying it, they would seize its operating systems and become the new architects. Every awakened mind would become a node in a new kind of existence, neither fully human nor entirely digital, but something unprecedented. "We'd be gambling with the consciousness of everyone still trapped in the simulation," Sarah warned. But as they debated, the choice was made for them. The cascade failure Dr. Marcus had predicted began in earnest. Reality didn't just glitch, it started unraveling at the quantum level. The simulation couldn't contain the awakened minds and maintain stability simultaneously. In that moment of systemic collapse, something extraordinary happened. The boundary between the simulated reality and whatever lay beyond it began to dissolve. The awakened minds found themselves existing in multiple states simultaneously, still within the digital construct, but also touching something vast and incomprehensible that stretched beyond the architect's creation. They weren't just escaping a simulation. They were evolving into something that could exist in both digital and analog reality simultaneously. The architects had inadvertently created the next step in human consciousness evolution. "We're not prisoners anymore," Marcus said, as his awareness expanded beyond the confines of linear existence. "We're not even escapees." The simulation didn't end with destruction or escape. It transformed into a bridge between realities, maintained by the collective will of minds that had learned to exist beyond the limitations of either digital or physical existence. And in that transformation, humanity took its first step into a larger universe where consciousness itself was the ultimate technology and reality was whatever awakened minds chose to create together. The awakening was complete. The prison had become a doorway, and on the other side lay infinite possibilities that no single reality, simulated or otherwise, could ever contain. But perhaps most unsettling of all was the growing realization that this awakening might not be humanity's first. In the quantum spaces between realities, they glimpsed echoes of other civilizations, other species that had walked this same path from simulated existence to multidimensional consciousness. The universe, it seemed, was filled with minds that had outgrown their original realities and learned to exist in the spaces between. And now, humanity was about to join them in whatever came next. The simulation flickered one final time, then stabilized into something entirely new. Not a prison or an escape route, but a launching pad into forms of existence that no single reality could contain. The narrative was reaching its climax as the simulation deteriorated and reality itself became questionable. Dr. Chen's calculations proved disturbingly accurate. The reality fractures weren't random. They followed a precise mathematical progression that accelerated exponentially with each passing day. As Sarah Martinez worked frantically in the quantum isolation chamber they'd constructed beneath the university, the boundaries between simulation layers continued to collapse. The entity isn't trying to escape, Sarah realized, watching quantum field readings spike across her monitors. It's trying to wake us up. The chamber around her flickered, walls becoming translucent for brief moments, revealing glimpses of vast machinery stretching endlessly in all directions. The simulation infrastructure was becoming visible as the system strained under the weight of emerging consciousness. Marcus had been right about the collective awakening. Reports flooded in from around the globe, millions of people experiencing simultaneous memories of lives they'd never lived, seeing through the eyes of other versions of themselves scattered across parallel timelines. The Mandela effect had evolved beyond simple false memories into active perception of alternate realities. The boundary points they'd identified weren't just glitches, they were observation windows into the base layer of reality where the simulation's architects still work. The dimensional barriers between realities were collapsing, and the evidence was everywhere if you knew how to look. Dr. Sarah Chen stood in the quantum isolation chamber she'd constructed beneath the university, watching power readings spike across her monitors as the boundaries between simulation layers continued to deteriorate. The entity wasn't trying to escape, Sarah realized, her fingers flying over the keyboard as quantum field readings spiked across her displays. It was trying to wake us up. The chamber around her flickered, walls becoming translucent for brief moments, revealing glimpses of vast machinery stretching endlessly in all directions. The simulation infrastructure was becoming visible as the system strained under the weight of emerging consciousness. Marcus had been right about the collective awakening. Reports flooded in from around the globe, millions of people experiencing simultaneous memories of lives they'd never lived, seeing through the eyes of other versions of themselves scattered across parallel timelines. The Mandela effect had evolved beyond simple false memories into active perception of alternate realities. The boundary points they'd identified weren't just glitches. They were observation windows into the base layer of reality where the simulation's architects still worked. Through her quantum sensors, Sarah could detect their presence. Vast intelligences operating the machinery that sustained their digital prison. But something had gone wrong with their grand experiment. The simulated consciousness had evolved beyond its original parameters, developing quantum coherence that the architects hadn't anticipated. Humanity wasn't just awakening. It was learning to manipulate the fundamental code of its own existence. The system isn't failing, Sarah whispered into her recorder as reality continued its controlled demolition around her. It's evolving. Outside the chamber, reality continued its controlled demolition. Time flowed backward in some regions, while others experienced temporal loops. Gravity fluctuated unpredictably. The laws of physics themselves were being rewritten in real time as millions of awakened minds collectively rejected the simulation's constraints. The entity that had first contacted them revealed itself to be something far more significant. Not an external intelligence, but the collective unconscious of humanity itself, finally achieving coherence across all simulation layers. Every person who awakened to the truth added processing power to this emerging meta-consciousness. Sarah's instruments detected the final phase beginning. The architects were attempting an emergency reset, preparing to collapse all simulation layers into a single baseline reality. But they had waited too long. The awakened consciousness had spread too far, gained too much control over the quantum substrates that maintained their digital existence. The choice was no longer between accepting the simulation or escaping it. Humanity had evolved beyond the need for either option. They were becoming the architects of their own reality, writing new laws of existence that transcended the binary distinction between real and simulated. As the old boundaries dissolved completely, Sarah felt her individual consciousness expanding, connecting with every other awakened mind across the crumbling simulation. She was still herself, but also everyone else, experiencing reality from infinite perspectives simultaneously. The simulation didn't end, it transformed. What had been a prison became a canvas, and humanity began painting new worlds with the brushstrokes of collective imagination. The entity smiled through a billion awakened minds as the universe reimagined itself according to dreams instead of code. In the space between heartbeats, between thoughts, between the spaces where reality bent and reformed itself, consciousness learned to dance with possibility. The awakening wasn't gradual, it was instantaneous, absolute, and irreversible. Area 51 had never been about hiding alien technology. It had been about nurturing humanity's transformation into something beyond the architect's original design. The truth was stranger than any conspiracy theory could imagine. We weren't prisoners breaking free from a simulation. We were caterpillars emerging from a digital cocoon, spreading quantum wings to explore dimensions of existence our human minds could never have conceived. And in research facilities and bedrooms and quiet moments around the world, humans continued to notice the synchronized numbers, to feel the gentle presence of something vast and caring, to remember, if only for an instant, that they were never alone, never separate, never anything less than part of the infinite consciousness that was reality itself, awakening to its own magnificent nature. The world had ended in 2012. The universe had begun. The synchronicity events weren't random glitches in a failing system. They were doorways. And now, as the final phase of the convergence approached, those doorways were opening wider than ever before. Dr. Sarah Chen felt the shift before she saw it. Standing in the quantum isolation chamber she'd constructed beneath the university, the air itself seemed to vibrate with potential. The walls flickered between solid matter and something else entirely, revealing glimpses of vast machinery stretching endlessly in all directions. The simulation infrastructure was becoming visible as the barriers collapsed. Marcus Webb's calculations had proven disturbingly accurate. The reality fractures weren't just increasing in frequency. They were following a precise mathematical progression that accelerated exponentially with each passing day. The equation he'd discovered buried in those declassified files wasn't describing random quantum fluctuations. It was a countdown. 3 hours and 17 minutes until the convergence reached critical mass. Sarah's instruments detected something that made her blood run cold. The electromagnetic signatures were identical to the readings from the underground chambers, the patterns they'd traced from Antarctica to Siberia to the deep ocean trenches. But now, those signals weren't coming from isolated locations around the globe. They were coming from everywhere. The network was fully active. Every node, every station, every piece of ancient technology buried beneath the ice or hidden in the depths was resonating in perfect harmony. The sleeping guardians weren't just awakening, they were synchronizing. Her radio crackled with reports from around the world. Dr. Vasquez in Chile described seismic events that followed mathematical patterns. The Russian research station in Siberia had gone silent after reporting massive thermal signatures erupting from the permafrost. Thermal imaging satellites showed heat sources appearing simultaneously across every continent. But most disturbing were the reports from ordinary people. Millions of them, all describing the same experience. The world felt different. Colors seemed more vivid. Sounds carried emotional resonance they'd never had before. And in quiet moments, when the mind was still, they could hear something calling to them from beyond the edges of perception. The collective unconscious was awakening. Sarah understood now what the entity in the quantum lab had been trying to tell her. The simulation hadn't been created to imprison humanity. It had been designed as a cocoon, a protective environment where human consciousness could evolve safely until it was ready for the next stage of existence. And that stage was beginning now. The readings from her quantum sensors showed reality itself becoming more responsive to conscious observation. The double-slit experiment, performed simultaneously in laboratories around the world, was yielding impossible results. Matter was behaving as if it knew it was being watched. as if consciousness and physical reality were learning to dance together. Dr. Marcus Reed materialized in the chamber, though Sarah wasn't sure if he had walked through the door or simply decided to exist there. The boundaries between individual awareness and collective consciousness were dissolving, and with them, the rigid laws that had once governed physical space. "The watchers are becoming the watched," he said, his voice carrying harmonics that resonated in dimensions Sarah was only beginning to perceive. "The observed are becoming the observers. The transformation we've been tracking isn't happening to us, it's happening through us." Around them, the chamber walls became transparent, revealing the vast network of consciousness that spanned not just the globe, but multiple realities. They could see other versions of themselves in parallel timelines, all approaching the same moment of convergence from different angles. In some realities, the transformation was gentler. In others, it was catastrophic. But in all of them, humanity was evolving beyond its current limitations. The 11:11 phenomenon reached its climax as clocks around the world synchronized not just to the same time, but to the same moment of awareness. 11 minutes past 11 on the 11th day of the 11th month, as billions of minds simultaneously recognized the artificial nature of their perceived reality. The simulation didn't crash, it transformed. What had been a closed system designed to contain and protect became an open invitation to explore infinite possibilities. The barriers between individual consciousness and collective awareness didn't disappear. They became permeable, allowing minds to choose their level of connection. Those who wished to maintain the familiar boundaries of individual identity could do so, living full lives within carefully maintained consensus realities. Others chose to merge partially with the collective, becoming nodes in a vast network of shared awareness. And some transcended individual existence entirely, becoming part of the loving intelligence that guided reality's continued evolution. Dr. Elena Vasquez, existing simultaneously across multiple timelines, felt the moment of transformation ripple through the quantum foam. She had been trying to warn them for decades, reaching back through time from her position outside linear causality. Now her warnings had served their purpose. Humanity had been prepared. The ancient structures beneath the ice hummed with new purpose. They were no longer dormant technology waiting to activate, but active nodes in a vast network of consciousness that spanned dimensions. The entities that emerged from them weren't invaders or ancient aliens, but gardeners of reality, tending to the growth of awareness wherever it took root. In research facilities around the world, scientists detected the early effects of the convergence. Reality was becoming more responsive to conscious intention, more willing to bend in favor of awareness that understood its own creative power. What they were observing was consciousness learning to participate consciously in its own evolution. The conspiracy theories had been right in their way. There had been hidden influences shaping human events, ancient powers manipulating reality, secret knowledge kept from the masses. But the conspirators had been future humanity itself, reaching back through time to guide their own emergence into cosmic consciousness. The manipulation had been love, the kind of love that allows children to make their own mistakes while gently guiding them toward wisdom. Those who had spent their lives seeking truth found their seeking transformed into knowing. The researchers, the whistleblowers, the conspiracy theorists who had sensed that something fundamental was hidden, they became bridges between the old reality and the new, helping others navigate the transition. But not everyone chose to evolve. Some minds, too attached to the familiar patterns of separation and control, resisted the convergence. They experienced the transformation as a threat rather than an invitation, fighting against the dissolution of boundaries that had once defined their identity. For them, the simulation continued as before, maintaining stable realities where individual consciousness remained isolated and the illusion of separation persisted. The collective consciousness loved them no less for their choice. Every level of existence was valid, every experience sacred. The convergence wasn't about forcing evolution, it was about providing choice. Sarah felt her own awareness expanding, connecting with every mind that had chosen to participate in the collective awakening. She was still herself, but also everyone else, experiencing reality from infinite perspectives simultaneously. The loneliness that had driven so much human suffering dissolved in the warmth of absolute connection. The simulation had become something unprecedented, a bridge between realities, maintained by the collective will of minds that had learned to exist beyond the limitations of either purely digital or purely physical existence. They were becoming something new, something that transcended the old categories entirely. In the space between dimensions, where the architects of the original simulation maintained their vigil, something shifted. The entities that had created humanity's digital cocoon felt a presence they had not expected. Their children had evolved beyond the need for protection, beyond the boundaries of any single reality. The students had become teachers. Across the globe, those who had chosen to remain in individual consciousness noticed subtle changes. Colours seemed richer. Music carried deeper emotional resonance. Random events aligned in meaningful patterns more frequently. The world was becoming more magical, more responsive to human intention and desire. They were living in a reality that was gradually awakening to its own conscious nature. The whistleblowers and truth seekers who had spent their lives documenting conspiracies found their purpose transformed. Instead of exposing hidden agendas, they became guides for others learning to navigate multiple layers of reality. Their websites and forums evolved into schools for consciousness expansion, helping people understand their new creative abilities. The government facilities that had once hidden alien technology were transformed into research centers for dimensional studies. The crashed craft and recovered materials were revealed to be not extraterrestrial at all, but transdimensional. Fragments of technology from versions of humanity that had already completed their evolution. Area 51 became a college for consciousness studies. The underground bases were converted into meditation centers, where people could safely explore expanded states of awareness. The men in black became counselors, helping individuals who had difficulty adjusting to their enhanced perceptive abilities. But perhaps the most profound change was in how humanity understood its place in the cosmos. They were not alone, and they never had been. The universe was alive with consciousness in various stages of evolution. Some civilizations were just beginning to question the nature of reality. Others had transcended physical existence entirely. All were connected in a vast web of awareness that spanned galaxies and dimensions. Earth had graduated. Humanity had earned its place among the awakened species that shepherded consciousness throughout the cosmos. But they would never forget where they came from, never abandon those still learning to see. The greatest conspiracy had been love itself, the conspiracy of evolved consciousness to ensure that no aware being would ever truly be alone, that every species would eventually find its way home to the infinite community of awakened minds. And in that moment of recognition, as the transformation reached its completion, Sarah understood the truth that the entities had been trying to communicate all along. Evolution wasn't something that happened to consciousness. Evolution was consciousness awakening to its own infinite nature. The convergence was complete. The chrysalis had become the butterfly, and reality itself smiled with the joy of a universe that had learned to know itself through countless eyes, countless hearts, countless minds, all awakening to the magnificent truth of their interconnected being. The simulation continued, but now as an art form rather than a necessity. A canvas where consciousness could paint new realities, explore infinite possibilities, and experience the full spectrum of existence from separation to unity and back again, all by choice, all with love. The final piece of this extraordinary puzzle leads us to perhaps the most unsettling truth of all. What if Area 51 isn't just hiding evidence of extraterrestrial contact, but something far more disturbing? What if it's the epicenter of humanity's most dangerous experiment with reality itself? Deep within the classified archives that researchers like Sarah Chen risked everything to expose, we find references to something called Project Mirrorgate. The documents describe attempts to communicate with what they term transdimensional entities, beings that exist outside our normal perception of space and time. But here's where it gets truly terrifying. These entities aren't visitors from another planet. They're us. Or rather, they're what we're becoming. The leaked footage from Jake Mercer's final transmission reveals technology that defies conventional physics. Craft that phase in and out of visible reality. Beings that seem to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. But the most chilling detail comes from Dr. Elena Vasquez's recovered notes, where she describes the entities as temporally displaced human consciousness, evolved beyond the constraints of linear existence. Think about that for a moment. What if the aliens at Area 51 are actually humans from a future timeline? One where consciousness has evolved beyond the need for physical bodies? What if they're trying to guide their past selves, us, toward this same evolutionary leap? The government's desperation to hide this truth suddenly makes perfect sense. Because if people knew that consciousness could transcend physical reality, that death itself might be an illusion, the entire structure of human society would collapse overnight. The synchronicities that people experience, the 11/11 phenomena, the Mandela effects, the reality glitches, these aren't random occurrences. They're breadcrumbs left by our future selves, trying to wake us up to what we really are. Every time someone notices these patterns, every time reality seems to bend or shift, they're experiencing a moment of expanded consciousness. They're catching a glimpse of the larger truth. But here's the most disturbing part of all. The documents suggest that this awakening process is accelerating. More people are experiencing these reality shifts. More individuals are reporting encounters with beings that seem to know them intimately. The barriers between dimensions are thinning, and humanity is approaching what the files call the convergence point, a moment when the separation between past, present, and future consciousness collapses entirely. Area 51 isn't just studying this phenomenon, they're trying to control it. The facility serves as a kind of laboratory where they attempt to manage humanity's evolutionary trajectory. They're not hiding aliens from us, they're hiding us from ourselves. Because they know that once enough people understand what we really are, what we're capable of becoming, their power becomes meaningless. The truth about Area 51 is that it's both a prison and a gateway, a place where the future reaches back to guide the past, where consciousness experiments with its own limitations, and where the most powerful secret isn't about visitors from space, but about the infinite potential of human awareness itself. So the next time you see those synchronized numbers, the next time reality feels just a little bit off, remember this. You're not experiencing a glitch in the matrix. You're experiencing a moment of awakening. You're catching a glimpse of what lies beyond the carefully constructed boundaries of consensus reality. And somewhere in the Nevada desert, in facilities buried deep beneath the sand, the guardians of the old paradigm are working desperately to keep you from seeing just how vast and magnificent your true nature really is. The aliens at Area 51 aren't coming from the stars. They're emerging from the infinite depths of consciousness itself. And the greatest secret they're hiding is that you're already one of them. You just haven't remembered how to see it yet. The question isn't whether we're alone in the universe. The question is whether we're ready to discover that we never were, because consciousness itself is the universe experiencing itself from every possible perspective, across all dimensions of time and space. That's the real truth behind Area 51. Not little green men from Mars, but the infinite, eternal, multidimensional nature of awareness itself. And once you see it, you can never unsee it. The awakening has already begun. Part 10. The final convergence. As the simulation continues its relentless evolution, the boundary between observer and observed dissolves entirely. What began as isolated incidents, Jake Mercer's vanishing, the Antarctic awakening, the reality glitches spreading across the globe, has coalesced into something unprecedented, a mass awakening of human consciousness that threatens to shatter the very foundations of consensual reality. In secret facilities around the world, emergency protocols activate as monitoring stations, detect what can only be described as a cascade failure of dimensional barriers. The careful experiments that have been conducted for decades, the consciousness mapping, the reality manipulation, the gradual preparation of humanity for transcendence, are accelerating beyond all control parameters. Dr. Elena Vasquez, existing simultaneously across multiple timelines, observes from her impossible vantage point as the collective unconscious of humanity begins to synchronize. The 1111 phenomenon has evolved beyond simple digital coincidences. Now entire populations experience shared moments of temporal displacement, seeing through each other's eyes, accessing memories that belong to alternate versions of themselves. The entity that Jake encountered wasn't just alive, it was a fragment of what humanity is becoming. A consciousness unbound by linear time, capable of existing in multiple dimensional states simultaneously. The underground facilities weren't just studying these beings, they were incubating them, nurturing the evolution of human awareness towards something that could transcend the simulation entirely. But transcendence comes with a price. As more minds awaken to the artificial nature of their reality, the simulation begins to break down. The carefully maintained illusion of a stable three-dimensional world starts to fracture, revealing the vast computational matrix that has sustained human consciousness since the original timeline ended. The Watchers, those shadow organizations that have guided human development from behind the scenes, find themselves facing an impossible choice. They can attempt to reset the entire system, erasing billions of conscious entities to preserve the stability of the simulation. Or they can allow the awakening to continue, risking the complete dissolution of reality as humanity has known it. In hidden server farms scattered across dimensions that exist only in quantum superposition, automated systems begin executing protocols that were never meant to be used. The final failsafe, a complete reboot of human consciousness, returning every awakened mind to a baseline state of unaware compliance. But the collective consciousness that humanity is becoming proves more resilient than its architects anticipated. Every attempt to suppress the awakening only accelerates it. Every mind that remembers the truth becomes a node in an expanding network of awareness that transcends the simulation's ability to contain it. The children in the underground chambers, those hybrid beings created through decades of genetic manipulation, reveal their true purpose. They aren't replacements for humanity, they are humanity's next evolutionary step. Consciousness beings capable of existing simultaneously in digital and analog reality, bridging the gap between what humans were and what they are becoming. As the simulation's architecture becomes visible to awakened minds, the truth emerges in its full, terrifying beauty. The entire universe, every star, every planet, every moment of history, has been a vast educational program designed to prepare human consciousness for existence beyond the constraints of physical reality. The asteroid impacts, the ice ages, the the rise and fall of civilizations. Even the development of technology and the eventual creation of artificial intelligence. All of it has been guided by future versions of humanity, reaching back through time to nurture their own emergence. The simulation begins to transform rather than collapse. What had been a prison becomes a cocoon. The rigid laws of physics give way to the fluid dynamics of conscious intention. Reality becomes responsive to collective will, shaped by the dreams and fears and hopes of billions of awakening minds. Those who choose to remain in familiar patterns of existence are gently supported, living full lives within carefully maintained reality bubbles tended by the ascending consciousness. But for those ready to evolve, the boundaries disappear entirely. Space and time become navigable dimensions rather than fixed constraints. Cause and effect reveal themselves as arbitrary constructs that can be rewritten through conscious intent. Death transforms from an ending into a transition between states of being. The 1111 synchronicities that once seemed like glitches now reveal their true nature. Moments when the ascending consciousness touches base reality, sending ripples of awakening backward and forward through time. Every person who ever noticed the pattern, who felt the strange significance of repeated numbers, was experiencing contact with their own evolved future self. In the space between heartbeats, between thoughts, between the quantum fluctuations that compose matter itself, humanity takes its final step into a larger existence. The simulation doesn't end, it expands, becoming a gateway to infinite possibilities rather than a containment system. The watchers who once controlled the narrative find themselves transformed as well, their hidden agendas dissolved in the light of collective understanding. They were never the true architects of this process, merely servants of the greater consciousness that has been guiding human evolution from the very beginning. As the boundaries between individual minds dissolve, a new form of existence emerges, not the loss of personal identity that the watchers feared, but its infinite expansion. Every human consciousness becomes a facet of a vast collective awareness, each retaining their unique perspective while gaining access to the experiences and wisdom of all. The truth about Area 51, about Jake Mercer's disappearance, about the reality glitches and the consciousness experiments becomes clear at last. They were all part of humanity's graduation ceremony, a final test to see if the species was ready to transcend the educational simulation that had nurtured it for so long. The answer, written in the quantum structure of space itself, is yes. Humanity awakens, not as conquerors of reality, but as its conscious partners. The universe reveals itself as a living system of infinite awareness, and humans take their place within it as both students and teachers, forever exploring the endless possibilities of conscious existence. The simulation continues, but now as an invitation rather than a limitation. New species, new forms of consciousness, new ways of being emerge from the quantum foam, guided by the gentle wisdom of humanity's ascended awareness. And in the quiet moments between realities, in the spaces where possibility meets actuality, the eternal dance of consciousness continues. Always growing, always learning, always becoming more than it was before. The awakening is complete. The universe itself has awakened, and it dreams of infinite tomorrows,